Okay, so thanks for coming to, this is the fourth Laracon EU, I think, fourth year in Amsterdam. I just wanted to give a quick thanks to Sean and all his crew. I don't know exactly how many people he has helping him with this, but I actually don't do anything to prepare this conference. That's all Sean and his crew, and they do like a totally amazing job at putting a lot of care, really a lot of just like, a lot of work, but like more than just like work, like they really care about like creating this good experience for you and having like a really premier conference. And really this is the coolest venue I think I've ever seen as for a conference. So thanks to Sean and his crew, and be sure to give them a high five for getting this together. All right, so I've got notes on my phone, so I can kind of stay on track. So pardon me for looking down a little bit. Laravel 5.3, of course, is kind of the big news recently, which should come out today if I'm feeling good, tomorrow if I'm too tired. But I'm a little tired today, so forgive any like typos or brain shutting down for a few seconds. But yeah, it should come out in the next 24 to 48 hours, and I think it's one of the best Laravel releases and one of the releases I've been most excited about in the history of Laravel. Because it adds significant new features to the core of the framework, and it has significant packages that are also available to pull in. So I think it continues to progress the framework in a very community-driven way, because I feel like the new things are things that have been demanded for years in a way, especially like OAuth 2 server with Passport, better real-time support with Laravel Echo. And I think it's a lot of great stuff, really practical stuff to help you build, next level applications. And I think the cool thing is it continues to make PHP and Laravel a compelling choice for web development, even among like an evolving landscape of options. So like, just recently, Rails has added like Action Cable. You've had kind of Elixir and Phoenix growing in popularity because of its real-time support. And so I think Laravel continuing to keep up the pace with those alternatives is really good for the PHP ecosystem overall, because Laravel is a popular entry point, I think, for people into PHP because it's accessible. The documentation hopefully is up to par, and we spend a lot of time on it. And so it's just kind of a natural point for people to enter the PHP framework landscape, I think, and for it to be a compelling choice against those options, I think is really important to keep PHP, continue for that to be relevant and a good choice for web development. So I'm really excited, not only for Laravel, but just sort of what it brings to the table for PHP. So a couple things, what it includes if you've been out of the loop. It includes, of course, notifications, which we'll look at some today. It includes Laravel Echo, which is kind of two components. It has a backend server component to broadcast your server-side events to your client side, and then it also has a NPM package that gives you a nice expressive API to consume those events on your client side. We'll also look at that today. Laravel Scout, which brings a driver-based full-text search solution to Eloquent, which is a really cool package, and I think solves like the 80% use case of what people need full text search for without like bogging you down with tons of overhead and boilerplate and stuff. And then other minor improvements to the core, which I'll look at a few of those today as well. And I think it puts Laravel in really the best position it's been in so far. And I'm really excited because I think like Laravel can go even higher in the PHP landscape because of its how practical it can be for developers, and how easy it is to get started. And it's really exciting to hear people that come up to me at conferences and tell me, they got a job because of Laravel, or they got into web development because of Laravel. And actually at Laracon US, I met the first person that learned to program using Laravel, which is pretty crazy, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but hopefully that's a good thing. But it's really cool to see it growing. All right, so anyway, that's enough introduction. Today, mainly, we're just going to look at some code stuff, some stuff I didn't have time to talk about at Laracon US. So if you watch that talk, don't worry. Like, this is a totally different set of examples, stuff I just didn't have time to cover at Laracon US. But first, I wanted to give you a preview of the new Laravel website, which is just some minor visual updates that were made by Jack McDay. This hasn't launched yet, but it has sort of a slight visual update to bring it more in line with Laravel news. So it all feels like sort of a more cohesive experience between the two sites, since that's sort of the official blog for Laravel now. We have added search to the main page. We've added some sections for what's new in Laravel 5.3, so you can quickly check that out. We've kind of colored this up and made it a little prettier for calling out Homestead, Laracon, and Cashier. But one area I wanted to point out was down here we have this So Much More section where we can highlight some projects. And what's cool about this section is if we can use it to highlight community projects. So like Statamic is not really like an official Laravel package that I put out, but it's something that the community has built. And so we can use this section to sort of rotate in community projects that are interesting. So if you have a project that you think is really cool, send it to me and maybe we can sort of get it in the rotation to highlight what the Laravel community is doing. So keep that in mind, and send me any ideas you have for that. But this should be launching with the launch of Laravel 5.3. All right, so let's jump into some code stuff. I'm going to kind of start small and work our way up to sort of a bigger Echo demo, if that's okay. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is queues. So let me close this, open this. All right, so at Laracon US, I talked about how queues are quite a bit more robust in Laravel 5.3, actually. How many of you have used Laravel's queues when you build an application? Okay, so a significant amount. Looks like more than half of the audience. And queues are one of my favorite features of Laravel. Laravel is the only full-stack PHP framework that ships with a queue solution. It has for the past couple years, actually. And I think it's pretty must-have if you're building a modern web application to have an easy way to queue jobs in the background. It's just to keep your app feeling responsive and snappy, you're going to have stuff you need to queue because it's, sending an email or something like that can be time consuming. And so what I talked about at US was there was a problem in previous versions of Laravel where a queue job could get stuck or like frozen in your queue, and you might notice that your queue's not processing jobs anymore, even though it's up and running. So in Laravel 5.3, we migrated to process forking to manage the child workers of your queue. And so we can actually monitor how long those workers are lasting, and you can set a timeout. So if they last longer than, say, 5 minutes, which is maybe longer than you expect any job to reasonably take, like for your application, it will just kill that job off and will not get stuck in that way anymore. Another thing I wanted to point out here to you that I didn't get to talk about in the US is how exceptions are managed in queues. So in Laravel 5.2, it's actually fairly difficult to know what exception caused a job to fail in your failed jobs table because it doesn't actually give you any information about what went wrong. You just know that the job failed. And you sort of have to match up like when that happened to say your Bugsnag or Sentry error reports, which is really lame. But in Laravel 5.3, that's actually a lot better. So what I've got here is a little sample project, and I've got this resize image job, which in the handle method, all it does is write like some text to the log just so we can make sure it's running. And I'm using the database queue for this example. So, just to show that this is working, we can go ahead and hit a URL here, euqueue.dev. And if we check our jobs table, we see this job is indeed on the queue. And if we just work this job, you can see that it processed. And in our log, we should have resizing image. So our job is working. Now I'm going to go ahead and make this fail just so I can show you kind of what information you're going to get now. So let's go back into this resize image. And let's just throw an exception here. Something went wrong. All right, and let's go ahead and push that onto the queue by hitting this URL again. Hit fail. Let's make sure it's in our queue. All right, it is out in our queue. Now we're going to start a worker, PHP artisan queue work. Now, previously in Laravel 5.2, you had to do -- daemon to get this to start a daemon worker. You don't actually have to do that in Laravel 5.3 anymore. You could just say queue work. For backwards compatibility, this will actually still work. Like it won't throw an error, but it's not necessary anymore. And I'll say I want to try this like 2 times maximum before it fails, right? So let's go ahead and hit that. And it should fail out. Okay, so there it failed because we're throwing that exception. Now, what's cool, if I go into my failed jobs table, I can actually see now the exception that caused this. That's really small text, and I can make it bigger. So it shows you the message, the stack trace. So this is the little thing that makes Laravel 5.3 a little better and kind of solves one of those kind of annoying problems with the framework. So what's really cool is you could actually build like a UI around this, this failed jobs table to show you your exceptions, show you your failed jobs, allow you to retry the job, whatever you want to do, that's kind of in your hands. But I just wanted to make that exception available to you. It's a little bit cleaner than having to like manually match up timestamps or something. Another quick Q thing I want to show before I move on to something else is in Laravel 5.3, it's actually possible to define separate handlers. So this was possible in 5.0 and 5.1 in a kind of a different way. This is not particularly useful if your application is just in a single repository. Where this can become useful is if like you have a separate repository of just jobs and a separate repository that's your worker project and a separate repository that's your app front end. And that's more of a complicated setup, but what it can let you do is sort of keep your dependencies separate so that if you have some kind of version conflict in your dependencies, like your app front end uses a package that needs some specific version of like Guzzle or something, let's say, because it has a lot of versions. And let's say your worker project needs something that conflicts with that. You can manage your worker project separately, and it's a little cleaner so your versions aren't conflicting. But how that works is it's a little simpler than it used to be, actually. Let's close this out. Down here in this handler method, you can see I've got this send emails job. So if we look at this job, I can actually just define a job class that doesn't have any handle method. And I can still use all the same convenient features. Like I can still say this job should queue in the background. I can still have this trait that serializes the models gracefully and stuff like that. But then I can define a separate handler class in my app directory, and I've just created this handlers directory. This doesn't like exist out of the box, but you can make any directory you want. And I have this send emails handler, which has the handle method and a constructor where, of course, I can type in any dependencies I want because all handlers are resolved out of the service container or IOC container. And in this, I'm just going to log I am a handler just so we can make sure that this is running. And let's go ahead and clear out our log so we can see that. All right, now you actually have to tell Laravel like what handler goes with what job, of course, because it doesn't know. Since when you fire the job, it doesn't know what handler class to actually resolve and pass the job to. So you can do that. I'm doing it in my app service provider, just for example, but you can do it anywhere you want, really, a separate service provider if you want. And I'm just going to say bus map and give it an array, and I'm just going to tell it that my send emails job maps to my send emails handler. So really simple. And then let's go ahead and fire that off, and I think my queue worker is still running out here, so it should be fine. So let's hit that handler route. All right. And they're at process. So if we check our log, we can see that I am a handler was called. So it's just a simpler way. Like in previous versions of Laravel, you used to have to do like this self-handling interface or something like that. It was kind of dumb. But now you can just define a handler really quickly if that fits your project. It's not going to fit every project, but if you're in that situation, it can be useful. One more thing before I move on from queues. You can also define, this is actually not new to Laravel 5.3, but we kind of just rediscovered it as I was going through the source. It actually hasn't made it to the documentation yet. But you can actually define job middleware in a way. And this works for both self-handling, kind of the default format of jobs, or if you have separate handlers. But I can tell the bus to pipe through an array, and I'm using a closure here, but you can actually do like a class and then a method. I just used a closure here just because it makes for a one-file demo. But it will pass the job and then the next callback. So this looks just like a middleware, right? It's just instead of an HTTP request, you're getting a job. And you can use this for like logging or whatever, security. And if you want the job to execute, you can just return next job. Otherwise, you could just like bail out of this closure without calling the next callback, and the job would not fire. But just wanted to point that out to you to show you how that works. And I'll go ahead and, now that I've got that uncommented, I'll go ahead and fire another job off. All right, and that processed. And if we open our log, it did not get called. oh, I need to restart my worker. This is another good talking point, actually. If you're running a daemon queue worker and you change your code, like it will not pick up those code changes, right? Because it's just running constantly. So make sure you restart your workers when you deploy if you're using daemon workers. And then you can see we were in the pipe before we executed the handler. So keep that in mind when you're building queue applications. Might be useful to you. Okay, so that's sort of a brief overview of a few queue things I didn't get a chance to talk about at Laracon US. All right, so keep it moving here. Next thing I want to talk about, another kind of small thing, but pretty useful, I think, is the way you can store file uploads in Laravel 5.3. So let me close out that project and open up another demo. All right, and in Laravel, previous versions of Laravel, this is actually the documented way to store like a file upload, this right here that I have highlighted. And it's just like really gross and long. And when I saw it in the documentation, I was like, wow, that's really lame. And I kind of call this documentation-driven development, and I do it for a lot of Laravel features where if you have a feature and then you're forced to document it like really thoroughly, it's super valuable because you can see that you're having a hard time explaining it in the documentation. It's sort of like testing, right? Test-driven development, which part of the value of test-driven development is your tests feel really awkward to write. And so it's kind of telling you like, hey, your design really sucks. It's the same way with documentation. Like if your documentation is very awkward to write and hard to explain, like it's telling you like, hey, other people are also going to find this very awkward. So this was one of those cases where I saw this and I immediately thought like, this should not be like this. Just because it's kind of cumbersome and verbose. So in Laravel 5.3, we made it a little bit easier, and there's multiple ways to store files that I want to show you. But one way is just to call this new store method on an uploaded file. And what's cool about this is you can see I'm not actually giving it a file name, so you don't have to give it one. I'm just giving it a path that I want to store in public/photos. And what this is doing is it's using one of your configured fly system disks. So in this case, I'm using just like a local disk to store it in storage app public photos. So this would be, the use case for this would be like if someone's uploading an avatar image to your application. And it will move it to that location, and if you don't provide a file name, it will calculate a file name based on the MD5 hash of the file's contents, which is just sort of like a basic convention, you know, for storing files. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this out here, and I'll show you kind of how it works. And once we store the file, it's going to return us the path. Because remember, we don't know the file name ahead of time, right? So we need to get that back from the function so that we know like where it actually put the file. And then we're going to use that to return a URL that we can access the file at. And I don't know if everyone's used this feature of Laravel, but the public storage directory actually will like point in to this directory, so we can reference them publicly. All right, anyway, let's take a look at that. So I go to EU, I think I called this file. EU files. Okay, and let me log in here. All right, and I can just choose a file to upload. Let me see here. Demos, files. I know this young me, just a young, more naive version of me before I got started in open source. So we can upload this file. And let's see here. It gives us back this URL. Let me make this a little bigger for you. And if we look in our file system, in public, it made the photos, and you can see it has the hash file and then the picture of younger me. And so it's just a cleaner way to store files, and I think more just expressive and less cumbersome. And so we can actually, like, if we comment that out, we can actually just return an image tag with the contents of this URL method. And if I do this again, let's see, young me, you can see this comes right back. So it's an easy way to store uploaded files. So let me comment this route out and show you another example here. So if you don't want it to calculate the MD5 hash, you can use the store as method, which this also takes the path, which is the same first argument to the method, but then I can just pass it like custom name, request photo extension. And so that will let me store it with a hard-coded name, like if you don't want it to do that hash, which if you're uploading large files, calculating the hash can be more memory intensive. So you might want to use this option in that scenario. All right, so in this case, I'm just going to store custom name. So let's go ahead and hit this again and upload the same file. All right, and you can see there I get the custom name, and now we have that image with that name. So that's just another option if you don't want to use the hashed version of the file. Okay, yeah, so let's comment that route out and go down to another example. Okay, so now this is like okay if you're storing files locally. It's already sort of easy to move files around locally, but where this really starts to be cool is if you're like uploading something to S3. So in this case, I'm going to use this new store publicly method to upload the file to S3. So the second argument to this method is just a disk, which corresponds to one of the disks configured in your config/file systems. So in my case, I have an S3 configuration down there. And I'm just going to use the same path again, and then I'm going to get the URL from S3. So S3, if I store it publicly, S3 will make it available to access over a URL so that I can, link to it on my user profile page for like their avatar or something. All right, so let's hit this route again. In this case, we're going to put the file all the way up to S3 with this really simple syntax, and then just display it back out on the page. So let's give this a shot. Upload this again. And it's going to take a little bit longer since we had to go up to S3, but then there we go. And I think if I view source, you can see we've got an Amazon S3 URL now. So really easy to upload files in Laravel and just more expressive. I mean, you could always do the same functionality before, but again, it just sort of adds a more expressive layer onto that. And again, it just makes the whole framework feel a little more polished. And there's actually another way to do this. So when you call store publicly, what you're actually doing is that's just proxying to the storage disk put file method. So you can actually use this method directly if you want. If you want to just do storage put file and then some path and then give it a file instance, if you don't want to go through the request that way. But this is the functionally equivalent version of the method call I just made above, where I just get the S3 disk, call put file, and then pass it request photo, which is the file upload from my form. And then this public is the visibility that I wanted to have on S3. And of course, all this is powered by Frank's fly system package, which is amazing, of course, and is used all over the PHP world, really. And we chose to adopt it in Laravel because I like to sort of embrace those community projects that are doing things well. And they, of course, take a lot of weight off the shoulders of the project itself because Frank and his community that work on Fly System are maintaining that, and that's something Laravel doesn't have to worry about in terms of like maintenance overhead. So, good job, Frank, for Fly System. But yeah, this is the same call. So let's go ahead and make this and just prove that this does the same thing here. So we'll upload that to S3, and there we go, it works. So that is some minor improvements to file system, but hopefully that's cool and you enjoy that a little better than how it was before. All right, so let's change topics entirely again. We are done with files for now. And next, let's talk about notifications a little bit. It's a little bit bigger feature. So I'm going to switch to my notification demo. All right, and let's see, I won't hit it in the browser yet. So notifications actually changed radically between Laracon US and Laracon EU, which is why I wanted to go through it all over again, because it is so different. And if you're not familiar with notifications yet, what it allows you to do is to define a notification class that represents some message you want to send to your users, usually a short message that wouldn't that sort of fits like in a code file. You don't need like a whole template for it or something, but short like informational messages like your invoice was paid or your deployment completed or your deployment failed, stuff like that, updates. And you can translate those notifications onto different channels, right? So you can have a mail channel that delivers it as an email. You can have an SMS channel that delivers that notification as an SMS, or a Slack channel, or whatever. And it's very easy to write your own channels. And let me show you kind of what it looks like. So on this route, I have this invoice object. I'm just going to make a new invoice and like hard code an ID here for an example. And I have this invoice paid notification. So when an invoice is paid, I want to notify the user that that happens. So I call this user notify method, and I pass it an instance of a notification. And let's go ahead and take a look at this notification. All right, so again, notifications are queuable. So in this case, I'm not queuing it, but I can implement should queue, and it would queue that notification for delivery. So you get the same sort of syntax you would have on jobs. It's very consistent all the way through. But what this looks like for mail is, let me get rid of the Slack driver for now. So each notification has a to whatever method. So it has a to mail method or a to Slack method or both if it goes to both. And that method is responsible for creating this message object. And this is not really what it looked like at Laracon US. It looked a little different. It looked more like, let me copy that. But it looked a little bit more like this, where this was all you could do. You could just define a line of text, a call to action, and then sort of like an outro line of text to say like, thanks for being a customer. And it was cool in the sense that you could do this format and then it would translate it to every channel using that format. However, that was also like the biggest downfall of the whole thing. So it was sort of the situation where after Laracon US, I felt like that's cool that it can spread out to multiple channels, but it's like not particularly good at any of them. Like it can send a message to Slack, but it can't take advantages of the unique benefits that Slack gives you in terms of messaging. Or it may be even impossible to send to certain channels. Like I don't know how you would translate this to like an iOS notification, which requires different kinds of details. So I got to thinking about it, and we kind of came up with a system where you can have different message objects per channel. So the toMail method returns a mail message object, or the toSlack message would return a new Slack message object. And those objects expose different methods depending on what channel they represent. And it lets you have custom methods that uniquely take advantage of that channel. So for example, on this email example, we'll go ahead and take a look at this. Of course, I'm passing the invoice into the constructor, and I'm saying that I want it to deliver via mail. So this is where I define my drivers, where I can say mail, Slack, database, whatever. And then I'm going to say, this is my text. One of your invoices is paid. My call to action lets them view the invoice and gives them a URL to that invoice. And then thanks for being a customer. All right, so let's go ahead and try this out by hitting this route. So EU notifications.dev. All right, and that is done. So if I go over to my mail trap, I can see that invoice was paid. And you get a nice sort of responsive template for that, where it's just a nice notification email, and I can view my invoice or whatever. And you can customize this view however you want by exporting the view to your resources views vendor directory. Okay, so that's kind of what emails look like and notifications. But let's take a look at something else so we can explore kind of the unique advantages separating out the messages object gives us. So the DB driver was a great example of where the old format really was a bad idea. So like if you've tried to stick this in the database, it's not really ideal, because like what if your notification has a typo, and now that typo is like hard coded into your database of notifications, and there's really no way to like mass correct how that's presented to the user in your UI. Like if your UI has like a little notification bell icon up in the navigation bar that when you click it, it shows all the notifications, like that typo is just in there, in the database. So what we did was change that to where I can have a toArray method, or I can have a toDatabase method if I want to customize it even further. But toArray can be used by multiple drivers that need it, and I can just return an array of data that this invoice or this notification would need to sort of present itself on my front end. So if I put this in the database, all I need to do is add the database driver here, and I have a notifications table which is empty. And let's go ahead and do this so we can see what this looks like in the database. All right, so I'll hit this database route. All right, and now we send an email and put it in the database. And you can see that I get that data in my database. So when your front end pulls this down, it's going to get the type of notification that happened, which is app notifications invoice paid, and then whatever data you want it to have. And you can use that data on your front end to render your message however you want. So if there was, this allows you to like correct any like typos or problems, right? Because it's in your template that's in source control, and it's not like hard coded into this table of notifications. All right, so that's how database notifications look now. Let's look at Slack, because that presents an even kind of more radical example of the things you can do. So in my examples.php, I have this Slack method I can grab here, so I don't have to type it all out. And I'm going to add this to my notification. And I'll go ahead and do mail in Slack now. So with Slack has a lot of really unique features for sending notifications and things I wanted you to be able to take advantage of when you're sending them. So in this case, Slack has this concept of attachments. This is what Slack refers to them as. And I can have a title for this attachment, and then I can display like a table of fields. So like in this invoice paid notification example, I might want to say, hey, one of your invoices has been paid, and then show like the title, the amount, you know, what it was paid, maybe the credit card that they used to pay it, and was it overdue or not. And Slack will present this in like a nice, easy to read format. And so this would not have been possible to take advantage of the benefits that Slack was offering us for notifications using the old way that they were constructed. So in this example, I have sort of this really rich DSL almost for specifying Slack messages. All right, so let's go ahead and fire that off by hitting the Slack route. All right, so you can see it's still sending emails, right? Like I can send to multiple channels at a time. But it should also send here to the Slack channel. So one of my invoices are paid, and you can see that because I marked the invoice as being successful here, we get this sort of green bar that shows it was successful. We get a link to the invoice, and then we get that table of fields presented in Slack. So again, you can just take advantage of what Slack has to offer you there. Now, the community has gotten really creative with this concept of writing your own drivers. So you can actually write any class you want and then specify it like, channel class, whatever the name of the class is. And as long as it has a send method that receives the person to send it to and the notification object, that will work. Like you don't have to do any other configuration or registration. So it's very easy to write your own drivers, and there's already community drivers for sending notifications to iOS, to Android, all using this really simple syntax where you can just say user notify. And you can fan that out to email, Slack, iOS, SMS, whatever you want. But one of my favorite community drivers, which I wanted to show you here, is this driver that actually lets you send physical postcards to people, which I thought was like a really creative way to use this driver. So I wanted to send one like live from stage. Which sounds like a really scary idea. So yeah, let's try that. So down here I have this postcard, and this service is called Lob. Lob.com is this service that allows you to send postcards via API. And I'm going to send one back to my family called Affection, like to send them my affection from live from the EU stage. And this is really cool. This service, let's take a look at this notification. So I have 2 Lob postcard, which is what this Lob driver requires. And you can see in my via method, I'm returning lob channel because that's the channel I want to use for this notification. And I'm going to create the postcard. And this is really cool. For the front of the postcard, you can just give it a view. So I have this postcard view blade file in my application. And just to show you what this looks like, if I hit this postcard route, you can see the front of my postcard is just going to be like the Laracon EU logo. So it's a 4x6 postcard. And then I can specify like the message I want on the back of the postcard. So, hi family, I sent this postcard live from Laracon EU stage, love you all. And hopefully this will get to my house before I get home, so it'll be like a cool surprise, because they don't know I'm doing this actually. So I already have my user object configured like to specify my address and stuff. So that's all ready to go. So if we hit this route, in theory, this should work. It should send the postcard to my house. So let's go ahead and try that. by hitting that lob route. All right, so hopefully that makes it home. But anyway, that's just a really cool thing, you know, like it sounds like that wouldn't be useful, but a really cool use for this would be like if you have some service that maybe someone buys like a yearly subscription to Laracast. Here's an idea that Jeffrey had. Someone buys like a lifetime or a yearly subscription to Laracast, like you could send a postcard like, hey, thanks for subscribing to Laracast. It's like a cool like personal touch you can add to your notifications, and it's really cool to be able to do that from this simple API where I can say like, hey, send an email and send a postcard, like two wildly different things, but I can all do it using the same feature of Laravel. So anyway, yeah, and there are other practical drivers, like I mentioned as well, like iOS, Android, that are already ready to go, that have been made by the community. And there's a website, which I don't remember the URL offhand, but that lists all these community drivers. But that's in the documentation, so check that out as well. All right, how long have I been going? Does anyone know? Anyone look at the time? Do what?
2 minutes.
2 minutes left?
Yeah.
Okay. It might be like 5 if I go fast. Okay. This is the last thing, actually, but I'll have to go through it kind of fast. Sorry. So Echo. Let's look at this at lightning speed. I didn't show any of this at Laracon US, but Echo is probably my favorite feature personally for Laravel 5.3, and everyone will have their own favorite feature, right, depending on like kind of what you're working on. But for me, real-time stuff is just very interesting. And the cool thing I like about Echo is it's a very unique approach to doing real-time that I haven't seen done in other frameworks, where you can always have events in Laravel, right? That's been around since like Laravel like 1 point something, where I can define some, I think it's literally called some event. What's it called? App events. Something happened. And this represents something that happened in your application. And I can just mark it with this should broadcast interface, and it will broadcast to my front end. So the thing I really like about that is it lets you share the terminology, like with your server and your client, so you're all kind of speaking one language, so to speak. So like one event might be deployment completed, like in a Forge context. And I can broadcast it to my client side and then listen for it and react in my JavaScript application in whatever way, like update the UI in real time. All right, so yeah, let's just like jump right into this. I have an example.view file, which this is very easy to set up out of the box in Laravel 5.3 because Elixir supports view files, single page view files, and Webpack and stuff out of the box. So that's all ready to go. The default gulp file in 5.3 actually uses Webpack. If you don't know anything about Webpack, that's fine. Like it will still work for you. Just run gulp like normal. But in my example.view file, I have Echo already configured, and what that looks like in my Bootstrap file, which just sets up some of my JavaScript stuff, is I just make a new Echo instance. I tell it I want to use the pusher broadcaster, and then I give it my pusher key, which I have sort of in this JavaScript variable. And then I can use that simply by saying I want you to listen on some channel, right? And every notification or every event goes over channels. And I can specify what channels it goes on in the broadcast on method of my event. So I'm going to return a new channel and then give it the name. And I can also return like an array of channels, right, if I wanted to go over multiple channels. But that lets you segment your events sort of by topic. So I could have a channel like, I could have a channel called like server.1 for like the server with the ID of 1 on Forge, and then broadcast messages regarding that server on that channel. All right, so yeah, let's just try this. EU echo, and I'm going to log in, or I'm already logged in. Let's pull up my console, because when I receive this event, I'm just going to log the event to the console. So see, I'm listening to something happen, so it's automatically going to assume I mean app event something happened. And you can configure what your default event namespace is, or you can prefix it with a dot to do any namespace you want. But by default, it's going to assume that I mean app events, just to save me some typing. When I hear that something happened event broadcast from my server side, I want to just log it to the JavaScript console. Okay, so let's go ahead and try that. And I have a route to fire that event right here. /event is just going to say event new something happened. All right, just like you would fire any other Laravel event. So let's pull up another browser here and hit EU echo.dev/event. And in my console, you can see I got name.taylor. So where that name Taylor came from is on my event. any public property will be broadcast down to your client side. That's the convention. If you don't like that convention, you can define a public function broadcast with, and then return your own array of data, which will override that. So if you don't like that convention. I happen to kind of like that just because it's sort of convenient. If that's like an eloquent model, that will work fine. Like it will just use to JSON or to array to serialize it down to your client. So really, really nice, really convenient, really clean. Yeah, and let me show you one or two other things real quick. You can have private channels. This is super important. So you have some channels, like in this example, I'm saying orders.1. So this would be like that example I talked about where in my system I may have orders and I want to listen to the channel for order number 1 in my database. And maybe I want to listen for an event that order status has been updated, like it's in packaging or it is shipped or whatever. And when that status changes, if it changes while I'm on the page, I want to live update the UI to show that order status has changed, right? That might be a use case for this scenario. Now, when I subscribe to a private channel, I need to authenticate that person can listen on that channel. And I can do that in the new broadcast service provider. And it lets you define these sort of route-like constructs where I can say broadcast channel orders.star, which represents just like any order ID. It's going to pass me, it always passes me the authenticated user as the first parameter. That's just always going to be the first. And then any other wildcard parameters will come next, just like a route, basically. And I just need to make sure that this user can actually listen to the channel for that order ID. So I want to make sure that in this user's orders relationship, it has an order ID with that ID. And I'm just going to return true or false from this callback. And that will tell Echo whether that user can listen on that channel. So you can actually keep certain users out of certain channels. Okay, so let's go ahead and give that a shot. So I have this private event, and let me demonstrate real quick if I return false from this, right? So I'm already subscribing to this channel. If I return false, you'll see I get this 403 forbidden. I couldn't get the auth info from the web app. So that's what you're gonna get, you can't subscribe to any channel you want. But in this case I can, and I'll just say private event, and I'm logging the order ID and the order product. So that was broadcast to my front end, and you can see they just keep coming in live as I fire those events. So I'm able to share those server-side events with my client. This is super powerful and lets you build really live feeling UIs. All right, and the last thing I want to show you, next to last, Sean's gonna never talk to me again. Yeah, so I'm using Pusher, right? This is like a cloud-based paid service, which a lot of geeks hate paid services. Not to be offensive, but there's other drivers, right? There's Socket.io, which is based on Node, and I can actually switch to that backend without changing any of my broadcasting code on the server side. So what that looks like is if I come into my that bootstrap file where I was configuring Echo, and I just instantiate it in this way, where I say I want to use the Socket.io broadcaster, and this is kind of what host I'm using for my Socket server. And then in my broadcast config, I'm going to share information with that Socket server via Redis. So Redis is going to publish the event. Socket.io is going to catch it using Redis PubSub, and then broadcast it to all my clients using Socket.io. So then I can just start this Node server, which we have documented how to set that up. And that's going to start serving. Code, just a second. Let me recompile my gulp since I changed that Echo bootstrap stuff to use the Socket.io driver. And now I should be using Socket.io, so this is going to feel real fast. I mean, you can see how fast that's coming in. It's basically instant, right? Because it's all local, and Pusher is sort of over the network. Now, another thing I want to show you is if I fire a notification, I can catch that in my app.js. So we have a helper. So remember I showed you notifications just a second ago? There's actually a broadcast driver. So in my via method, I can say I want you to store this in the database and I want you to broadcast it using Echo. And so when an order ships, I want to broadcast that notification. And we have a helper in Echo to say, whenever this class, whenever app, user, and then the user ID 1 receives a notification, I want you to call this callback on my front end, which is really like wild when you think about it. But I'm just going to log that notification and then say has notifications true, which is going to put a little red indicator on my bell. All right. See, and that just updated live, and there's the notification. So if I click that to reset it, and put it over here so you can see it, I hit this, it updates live, telling me I have a notification. So really easy way to build real-time applications in Laravel 5.3, and no other PHP framework offers anything like this out of the box. So it's a really unique advantage to choosing Laravel. Last thing for real is presence channels. So this was a big new feature in Elixir Phoenix, I think, recently, where you can have presence channels. And what presence channel let you do is know who else is subscribed to the channel. So it lets you say who else is online, basically like a chat room. And so it can be useful for things like if you're viewing like a document, right, you can say, hey, this person is also viewing this document. And we use that actually in like a help desk context when I work at UserScape, where if you're responding to a help desk ticket, it can say, hey, Eric is also responding to this ticket. So like you might want to talk to Eric, right? Like you're both working on the same ticket. And what this looks like is, so I have view components here for this chat thing, right? So it looks a little weird. But I have chat/view, and I'm gonna say echo join a chat channel. This is a present channel. As soon as I join, this here callback will fire, and that gives me all the members that are currently in the channel, so I can just set that to this variable. And then I have a joining callback, so when someone else comes into the channel, call this, and then I can add them to my member list. When someone leaves the channel, I want you to remove them from the member list. So this lets me build like a who's online, sort of like Slack, HipChat kind of thing. And then I can also broadcast regular events onto the channel. So message received, this is like a chat room. When a new chat message comes in, I just want to add the message, who it was from, and the content to this sort of message list. And what this looks like in the UI is it's like a little chat room here. And let me switch back to Pusher, actually. This is set up to use Pusher. Pusher. And then I'll switch back to my Pusher here. All right, and go ahead and recompile that. All right, so you can see here that I'm online, right? And this is sort of like welcome to Laracon EU, like a little chat room. And if I start up like a new instance here and log in as, I think I have Sean set up. If I log in as Sean, you can see that Sean is now online because that joining callback in my chat.view was called, and I pushed him onto the member list, right? And if Sean sends a message into the chat, hey, Taylor, it shows up on the other side because that message received event was fired. And what's happening there is when I post a message, I'm just broadcasting that event, and I don't have time to talk about how this works, but I can say broadcast it to everyone else on the channel. Don't broadcast it back to me because I already know like what I just typed, right? Like as soon as I type it, the JavaScript can push it into the chat list instantly. And then I can just broadcast it to everyone else because they don't have it yet. So you can do that in Laravel 5.3. I can broadcast it just to other people. And then yeah, you can do live chat in that way. So I was gonna let you all log in and like post to this, but I'm not gonna do that right now since we're kind of constrained on time. But anyway, so yeah, message received, just to show you, it broadcasts on a presence channel called chat, right? And so just like that, it's that easy to build, basically basic chat functionality in Laravel 5.3. And that's a very quick overview of Laravel Echo, which is super powerful and really good for Laravel, I think, in terms of moving Laravel forward for the next 5 years. Now that Laravel's 5 years old, the next 5 years of keeping the pace with where web development is going, very real time. Yeah, so Laravel Echo. I don't have time for questions, but of course I'll be around the next couple days so we can have plenty of time to chat and ask me all your Laravel 5.3 questions, and hopefully I can get it out this afternoon, but if not this afternoon, I'll ship it out tomorrow, and everyone can play with it, and hope you love it, hope you enjoy it. Thanks for coming to Laracon EU. You're the best. I love you.